and this is family mapping.
Family mapping is the technique I encourage everyone to use, and the best way to learn how to do it is to actually make one. So go grab pen and paper and pull up this YouTube video because we are going to make a family map.
My name is Oliver Drakeford. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. This version of family mapping, I'm going to focus on clinicians and how I use family mapping to conceptualize, to create the treatment plan and discover the interventions that I'm going to use with the family. So this is the second video on family mapping. If you've not watched the first one, it does contain a lot of foundational themes and topics that are important to understand to really get the most out of family mapping. So I encourage you to find that. Family maps are very different from genograms. A genogram is about dates, who died, data, who got married when, facts, symptoms, and looking for patterns within that data. So while a family map does collect data, it also allows for more of a subjective experience. So my experience of the family in the room will show up on the family map. This makes family maps a bit more exciting and dynamic for me because I'm going to be able to play with my feelings and counter-transference and sort of record that. So just like a geographical map, a family map is a bit reductive in that it's simplifying very complex dynamics and relationships of a family into, pen and paper, and it lacks detail, doesn't account for change, and it doesn't really account for the complexities of family relationships and relational dynamics. That being said, it's still an excellent tool at capturing information that is going to be really, really important for conceptualization and treatment through a systemic lens. So when a family comes in, they're not able to describe the organization of the family. They're not able to tell you the hierarchy. It's not something that we think about. The information and data that we need then has to come out of the transactional field. So whether I'm observing family members interact with each other, or how family members interact with me, how they show up in the office, or how people speak to me, this is all data that I'm collecting to help inform the map that I create. For me, family mapping starts with the first phone call. Even before I've met the family, I start collecting data. So the person that makes the call to me or who reaches out first is giving us information by the fact that they're the ones that picked up the phone. I'm not quite sure what it means, but I am going to hold on to this sort of nugget of information and tuck it away somewhere for when I come and write my family map up. I'm going to think about what their story of the problem is. Is it a family problem, or are they saying that the IP is the issue and it's about fixing the IP? Who referred me is also information, whether they're coming because they found me or were recommended to me by someone versus being told by their psychiatrist that they have to come here. That says something as well about their willingness to explore issues in the family versus being told that they have to. And in the first call, I'm going to be listening out for who they think the identified patient is, who is the one with the problem, or who is the one with the issues that they're coming to seek family therapy for. If you work in residential, I think there's information about who is calling the therapists the most, which member of the family is calling the client the most, and vice versa. That's all information that I think is useful for your family map. Structural systems theory has this very interesting idea that the way a family shows up for their first session or sessions thereafter provides us with information. So whether a family shows up late or on time, if they come into the session in a chaotic whirlwind of anxiety, or whether they walk in stony-faced and silent, I think that tells us something. Again, a family can't really tell you about the structure and organization of the family, but they show it to us in various ways. and our job is to be a little objective and put our lab coats on and collect the information.
Perhaps one of the most famous ways that this is done is by observing where people sit in the room. So if you peek over my shoulder in the video, you'll see that this is the setup in my office. And as a family sits down in the first session or any session, I'm documenting where they sit. A family that sits with the IP in the middle is going to be very different from a family that sits all together on one sofa. So again, there is another video somewhere on my channel that explains this a little bit more, but the basics are that each person on your family map is going to be represented by a square. Just to make things more interesting, I've used different colors, but you really don't have to. You're going to initial the names just to remember who's what, and you position the squares across the page until it feels right for you. The space is important. That represents something, whatever it means to you. And I think if you're a therapist or a clinician, you're going to remember that the hierarchy is represented on this as well. So I put people with the most power at the top. We use lines to represent boundaries, and all boundaries are ways to separate out who participates in what group and how. So parents are normally in one group and the kids are normally in another subgroup, and there's boundaries around each of those groups. There's also could be boundaries between people on an individual level as well. And power can be depicted in a number of ways by making the size of the speaker square very big, perhaps increasing the distance between the speakers and the listener. This is what I love about family maps. It just has to make sense to you. But you can play with all of these different elements.
One of the more controversial things about structural family therapy is that we are going in as the expert in the family. And that's a bit unnerving because it's so different from what I do in individual work and what I've done before structural family systems came along. The ideal for the family does come from our knowledge of what works. If I were to funnel it down into one thing, it would be that the parents are in charge. I think that's the big one for me. Everything else I can co-create and adapt to the individual social, cultural, religious backgrounds of the family. And we want to do that as much as possible. But where I stand is that I want adults to be in charge. I don't want 4-year-olds driving. I don't want 7-year-olds telling everyone what we're going to have for dinner. I want the adults to do that. And yes, you can consult with the 7-year-old and ask what the 7-year-old wants for dinner, but the 7-year-old isn't going to dictate it. And a 17-year-old might have more influence and more say than a 7-year-old. That's totally appropriate too. In general though, we want parents to be in charge, the adults to be in charge. And that's all that I mean by bringing our expertise. As long as that is happening, I think everything else we can factor in with the individual needs, wants, and personal, cultural, social, economic backgrounds of the family. I've been racking my brains to think of an example where I would want the kids to be in control, and I cannot think of one. So if you do, please shoot me an email, and I'd love to think about it more.
So this is the ideal family map that I came up with for this family. At the bottom, I want the siblings all in one subgroup, with potentially Violet having a little bit more responsibility than the other two boys. Nice healthy boundaries moving up between the sibling system and the parent system, and the adult system. They are also nicely separated with a good clean boundary. So go grab your pen and paper if you didn't, and watch this YouTube clip, and I'll see you in a couple of seconds on the other side.
Did you wash your hands with soap?
So rather than think of this as us watching a movie clip, pretend that the family is in your office and they just get into this conversation. Basically, this is an enactment. The thing that stood out to me when I was deciding what clip to use was Violet, and it's basically all about her. From a structural perspective, she sounds an awful lot like a parent. This makes me think that she is leaving the sibling subsystem and moving up into a position of higher authority. So I'm going to change my map to reflect that she is somewhere in between the sibling and parent systems. I'm going to add one more layer to the family map, and that is the relationship lines. These connect people and describe what kind of relationship that they have. In this family, there's a lot of conflict. There's also some disconnect and I think some enmeshment. So these are the 3 lines that I use a lot.
We talked about this. You're not old enough to decide about these things.
We are old enough to help out.
Yeah.
Isn't that what you tell us, Dad?
Yeah, well...
A child can really only move up in the system if there is space for her. And space is created when mum and dad are fighting or there's an emotional disconnect between them. So it comes as no surprise that mum and dad get into a fight. However, before that happens, she seems to ally with dad against mum, and she sucks dad into the conflict, and dad falls for it, not taking mum's side.
Whether it's fair or not, that's the law.
The law should be fair. What are we teaching our kids?
To respect the law.
So this is a bit of a classic in family systems. You've got mum and dad on 2 different pages, and that leaves space in the parent hierarchy for one of the kids to sneak in and claim more power. So Violet is doing a really good job of separating mum and dad. She's got dad wrapped around her finger as well. So this links back to the first scene, because in a traditional or ideal family structure, she wouldn't be telling her younger brother to go wash her hands. That's mum or dad's job. Everything is revolving around the IP, which is Violet, who is in the middle of the diagram. She's also one of the largest squares that I've got. I feel that mum is going head to head with her, so they're the same size. Dad is wrapped around Violet's finger, and the 2 younger kids, they're disappearing a little bit, and I would be very worried about them as a structural therapist, because those are the ones that are going to get lost. So again, there is no wrong or right in a family map. This is just my take on it. Your diagram may look very different, and I'm showing you mine just so you know what my thought process is. And there are endless ways to create a family map, obviously with pen and paper, but I've used post-it notes, and for this video I use Canva a lot. Okay, this is where I geek out, because when you put the ideal map next to your family map, you get the treatment plan. Because the work that you have got to do as a therapist is to get the family from where they are to the ideal. And treatment plan, goals and interventions are all stemming from what needs to happen to get from A to B. In the next video of this series, I am going to show you how I turn this family map into a treatment plan. I'll discuss some of the theory behind it and the interventions that I would take. If you like this video and want more content like this, hit subscribe.